the ongoing immigration enforcement operations that are taking place in that city.
ICE protest, which they called the Day of Truth and Freedom.
Two protests, one that was happening at the airport that appears to be over now.
4:12 a.m. Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. A bone-chilling Arctic blast is screaming across the tarmac, with temperatures plummeting to a life-threatening negative 24 degrees. In the pre-dawn darkness, the Twin Cities are silent, but at Terminal 1, the atmosphere is electric with an impending clash of wills.
From MSP Airport right now, where we're following a protest. Faith leaders joining community members in demonstration against ICE operations.
While most of Minnesota is hunkered down, a massive group of faith leaders, labor union members, and activists are converging on the departures area. This was not a spontaneous gathering. It was the opening salvo of a statewide economic blackout dubbed a Day of Truth and Freedom. They didn't come with weapons, but with hymns and prayers, intending to turn the busiest transport hub in the north into a site of civil disobedience. They were there to protest the escalating surge of immigration and customs enforcement, ICE, operations in the state, specifically targeting the chartered deportation flights that utilize this very airport. But as the crowd swelled, the Metropolitan Airports Commission, MAC, and local law enforcement were already drawing a line in the frozen sand. This was a high-stakes gamble, a fight for the soul of the community versus the strict federal mandates of aviation security. The context of this raid is rooted in a city already on edge. Tensions in Minneapolis had reached a boiling point following the fatal shooting of 37-year-old Renee Good, a mother of 3 and a U.S. citizen, during an ICE enforcement operation just weeks prior. The community was reeling, and the airport protest was designed to bring that grief directly to the gates of federal authority. The protesters had a specific demand. They wanted major airlines like Delta and Signature Aviation to stop cooperating with federal deportation efforts. For hours, clergy members from diverse backgrounds, Lutheran pastors, Catholic priests, and Jewish rabbis, stood shoulder to shoulder, their breath visible in the freezing air, as they shared stories of families torn apart by recent raids. They believed their presence would force a conversation. However, the airport is a Tier 1 federal facility, and under the law, disrupting airline operations is an offense that carries immediate and heavy consequences. If you believe that reporting on these real-world clashes is vital for a transparent democracy, hit that like button and comment "Protect America" right now. Whether you support the faith, leaders' right to protest, or the authorities' duty to maintain order, your engagement helps this factual investigation reach a wider audience. To stay updated on the legal battles and the evolving security situation in Minnesota, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We don't deal in rumors, we deal in the raw, verified truth of what's happening on our streets and at our borders. Join us as we continue this deep dive into the 100 arrests that shook the Twin Cities. The trap for the protesters wasn't a physical cage but a legal perimeter. The Metropolitan Airports Commission had actually worked with organizers in advance, providing a permit that allowed for a specific number of demonstrators in a designated area. But as the morning progressed, the numbers grew far beyond the agreed-upon cap.
Protesters took the streets outside of MSP International Airport earlier today.
By 5:30 a.m., the crowd had spilled over into the roadway and terminal access points, effectively paralyzing the flow of traffic for early morning travelers. Airport police issued multiple clear dispersal orders, warning that the group had exceeded its permit and was now in violation of state and federal law. The death valley of this situation was the choice given to the clergy: leave the premises or face arrest. Reverend Mariah Furness Tolgard, a senior pastor from St. Paul, was among those who decided to stay. For these leaders, being handcuffed was a calculated act of bearing witness to what they described as a federal occupation of their state. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, the authorities moved in. This wasn't the chaotic riot portrayed in some circles, but a systematic, disciplined enforcement action. Minneapolis Airport Police, supported by local agencies, began the mass arrest of approximately 100 clergy members. Video from the scene shows faith leaders being led away in zip ties, their hands bound as they continued to sing hymns. These individuals were not charged with violent crimes, but with misdemeanor trespassing and failure to comply with a peace officer.
There are no deportations without transportation. The focus of this protest outside MSP International.
However, the sheer scale of the arrests, nearly 100 in a single location, sent a shockwave through the region. It was a massive intelligence gathering and processing event. Each person arrested was issued a citation and released, but the message from the authorities was unmistakable. The airport's sterile zone and its operational integrity are absolute. No amount of religious or political conviction would be allowed to stop the wheels of federal enforcement from turning. Behind the scenes, the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was defending its largest ever immigration enforcement operation in the state. While the protesters sang outside, the DHS maintained that their actions were necessary to remove criminal offenders who had been terrorizing Minnesotans for years. This creates a stark factual divide, a community seeing its neighbors taken in the night, and a federal agency claiming it is finally enforcing long-standing removal orders. The 100 arrests at the airport were the most visible part of a much larger, darker reality where thousands of federal agents were operating across the state. The protest at MSP wasn't just a local news story, it was a national flashpoint where the First Amendment met the unyielding wall of national security. This was the moment the crush occurred, not with clubs, but with the cold administrative power of the law. The mass arrest of nearly 100 clergy and community leaders was only the visible peak of a much deeper administrative and legal iceberg. To understand the gravity of what happened at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, you have to look at the weeks of investigation and surveillance that preceded that freezing morning. This wasn't a random outburst of activism, it was a targeted response to a secretive federal program known as Operation Metro Surge. For months, investigators within the Metropolitan Airports Commission and federal agents from the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, had been monitoring the rise in organized resistance.
No ICE on our streets! No justice, no peace! No ICE on our streets!
The maze here wasn't just a physical layout of the airport, but a complex web of legal loopholes and jurisdictional battles between the city of Minneapolis and the federal government. The investigation into the protest began long before the first hymn was sung at Terminal 1. Law enforcement had intercepted internal communications from the Interfaith Coalition on Immigration, which revealed that the group had studied the airport's layout with tactical precision. They weren't just looking for a place to stand, they were looking for choke points. Their objective was to identify the specific ticketing areas and security entranceways that, if occupied by just 50 to 100 people, would create a cascading delay for thousands of passengers. Federal authorities viewed this not as simple picketing, but as a deliberate attempt to interfere with civil aviation security. The maze deepened as it was revealed that these organizers were using encrypted messaging platforms to coordinate their movements in real time, attempting to stay one step ahead of the airport's patrol units. At the heart of the investigation was the controversial use of Signature Aviation, a private terminal at MSP often used for high-security federal deportation flights. Protesters had been tracking these flights using public flight tracking data, identifying tail numbers associated with the ICE Air Ops Division. They believed that if they could occupy the main terminal, they could create enough of a public relations crisis to force the Airport Commission to cancel the federal contracts. But the authorities were one step ahead. The Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, had been briefed on the potential for civilian interference with federal transport. They had already secured the perimeter of the private hangars, ensuring that while the public protest was happening at Terminal 1, the actual federal operations remained untouched. This was a strategic diversion where both sides were trying to outmaneuver the other in a game of high-stakes optics. The preparation for the takedown involved a massive paper trail that investigators are still untangling. The Minneapolis Airport Police had to coordinate with the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office to ensure they had enough transport vans and processing facilities for a mass arrest of this scale.
The Associated Press says about 100 people were arrested at Minnesota's largest airport today. Hundreds of businesses in the Twin Cities have been protesting ICE with a general strike.
They knew that arresting 100 people, many of them elderly religious leaders, would be a logistical nightmare that could easily turn into a PR disaster. They documented every warning given, every dispersal order read over the bullhorns, and every foot of CCTV footage to ensure that when these cases went to court, there would be no doubt that the protesters had knowingly violated Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) regulations. The authorities were closing in, not with weapons drawn, but with a mountain of evidence that this peaceful protest was a calculated attempt to disrupt a vital piece of American infrastructure. As the tension builds, the short, sharp reality of the law begins to take hold. Short sentences, rapid processing, no exceptions. The authorities had categorized the protesters into two groups, those with permits and those who had moved into restricted zones. By 6 a.m., the maze was sealed. Every exit from the ticketing lobby was monitored by officers in tactical gear. The heartbeat of the airport, the constant flow of travelers, had slowed to a crawl. The preparation for the takedown was a symphony of cold administrative precision. Officers were briefed on passive resistance tactics, knowing that the clergy members would likely go limp, forcing police to carry them out in front of rolling news cameras. This was a battle of narratives, and the authorities were determined to show that rule of law would prevail over civil disobedience, no matter how righteous the cause seemed to the participants. The investigation also touched on a sensitive inside element. Authorities were looking into how the protesters knew the exact timing of the deportation manifest. There were concerns that a leak within the airport's expansive workforce, which includes thousands of contractors and service workers, might have been feeding information to the activists. While no individual was formally charged with espionage, the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, immediately ordered a security reset for all non-federal employees with access to the tarmac. The paper trail grew longer as subpoenas were issued for social media records and bank statements of the lead organizing bodies.
Yesterday felt like a little bit of positivity with the protests and all the turnout, and then you wake up this morning and it's all just torn right out from under you again, so just can't take it anymore.
The federal government wanted to know who was funding the logistical support, the transport buses, and the legal defense funds for these 100 individuals. As the sun hit the frost-covered runways, the authorities were ready to move from investigation to action. The preparation was complete. Every officer knew their role. Every camera was angled, the maze had been constructed, and the 100 protesters were now firmly inside it. The world was about to watch, as a major American city's airport became a test case for how the government handles mass civil disobedience in a post-9/11 security environment. The tension was at its peak. The next hour would determine whether Minneapolis would remain a hub of travel or become a permanent landmark of resistance. Part 3. The climax, aftermath, and warning. The atmosphere at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport reached a point of no return as the clock struck 6:15 a.m. The time for warnings was over. The order to clear the terminal was relayed through the earpieces of a combined force of airport police and sheriff's deputies. What followed was an intense, high-stakes display of civil enforcement. As the tactical lines advanced, they didn't use violence, but they used unyielding physical pressure to collapse the blockade. Officers breached the human chains that had been formed in front of the TSA checkpoints. When the protesters refused to move, the police began a process of kinetic removal. One by one, pastors, rabbis, and community elders were tackled by the reality of federal law. They were lifted from the ground and carried toward the processing zones. This was the moment the protest was smashed by the administrative weight of the state. The intensity within the ticketing hall was suffocating.
There was a large protest and rally outside of MSP International, just a big show as part of this day of action.
While travelers watched in stunned silence, the air filled with the sound of snapping zip ties and the firm, repetitive commands of the arresting officers. The protesters, staying true to their training, went limp, forcing the police to use 2 or 3 officers per person to drag them away. It was a slow, grueling process of strategic removal. Each of the 100 arrests was handled as a separate incident, documented by body cameras to ensure that the day of truth and freedom resulted in a clean, undeniable legal record. By the time the final protester was removed from the roadway, the physical barrier was gone, but the political explosion was just beginning. The airport's secure perimeter had been restored, but at the cost of seeing its own community leaders led away in chains. The aftermath of the raid revealed a complex and sobering reality. As the processing center at the Hennepin County Jail filled with the 100 detainees, the inventory of the event began. Authorities seized a massive amount of digital evidence, cell phones and tablets used to coordinate the breach, along with detailed schedules of federal flight patterns. The seizure revealed that the protesters had successfully mapped the arrival of an ICE Air Ops flight down to the minute. This was a sophisticated level of surveillance that alarmed federal officials.
Let them pray. Let them
While the physical was limited to banners and loudspeakers, the intelligence, the knowledge of secure federal movements, was the real prize of the investigation. The full scope of the disruption was massive. Over 200 flights were delayed, and thousands of passengers were caught in a security bottleneck that lasted well into the afternoon. This event serves as a powerful, patriotic moral lesson for every American. Freedom requires vigilance, but it also requires a deep respect for the systems that keep our nation functional. While the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy, the safety of our skies and the integrity of our international gateways are equally sacred. The Minneapolis Airport Raid demonstrated that no matter the cause, there is a line that cannot be crossed. When a protest threatens the infrastructure that connects our states and protects our borders, the rule of law must be the final arbiter. We must remain a nation of laws, where the security of the public is never held hostage by any group, regardless of their convictions. The investigation into the 100 individuals and their financial backers is still active. Federal prosecutors are looking into whether this was an isolated event or part of a larger nationwide strategy to target soft points in American aviation. This is a warning to all: the government has shown its hand. They will not allow the gears of the federal system to be jammed. If you want to stay on the front lines of this developing story and see how the justice system handles these 100 cases, you must subscribe now. This is a battle for the very definition of American order, and we are the only ones bringing you the unfiltered, factual truth. This investigation is far from over.